Live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Here to set you free. How you doing? I'm Leslie Marshall. Sorry, no ring light, so no smoke and mirrors and no lighting. Need a new one. Mine's all messed up. It keeps falling down. Anyway, happy Tuesday to you. We have an incredible show coming up. We're going to be talking about the big Supreme Court decision and arguments that are going to be made for hours and are being made right now. On the highest court in the land, and how that could affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people with regard to student debt. We're going to be talking about that, and stick around for that. But first, let's kick it by checking what's ripped from this headline. Well, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court case today, they began hearing arguments. There were two cases, actually, not one, that challenges the president's $400 billion student loan forgiveness program. Now, critics of the president, his administration, and specifically this plan to cancel federal student loan debt for more than 40 million Americans say it's expensive, it's unfair, and abuse of executive power. I admit my loans are all paid for, and I wish somebody had done this for me, but we're in a very different time now. Supporters of the program protested outside Chief Justice John Roberts and other conservative justices, and they zeroed in on the issue of executive authority and separation of powers. They're questioning whether Congress needs to sign off on such broad relief, as opposed to it being the stroke of a pen by the president with an executive order. Roberts asked Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar, who argues for the administration, he said, quote, Congress shouldn't have been surprised when $500 billion is wiped off the books. We take very seriously the idea of separation of powers, he went on to say, and that power should be divided to prevent its abuse. I think we know where he's going to stand and where he's going to vote. It's a conservative court, right? This, he was making a comparison to the Supreme Court's decision, by the way, to block former President Donald Trump's unilateral attempt to dismantle the DACA program for undocumented immigrants brought to the United States when they were children. So Prelogar, in turn, argued that the Education Secretary does have the authority to provide relief under the HEROES Act. Now, that's a law that in 2003 aimed at ensuring federal student loan borrowers would not be economically devastated during a national emergency. And you might say, well, where's the national emergency? Remember, at the time the executive order was written, we were in a national disaster. We were in a national emergency. It was called COVID, and we were in a pandemic. And she said, quote, well, of course, we think Congress did address this expressly here, and Congress directed that in the context of a national emergency. That is the limitation of the HEROES Act. So the secretary can't invoke this whenever he wants. There has to be that predicate: war, a military operation, or national emergency. We all know COVID, a lockdown, a pandemic are a national emergency. This is this lawsuit, by the way, is a group of 6 GOP, very surprised, led states, today challenging the program before the highest court in the land, questioned by liberal judges to answer the critical question of how exactly they're harmed, because that's their claim, right? This is harming us. Okay. David Namias, who is a staff attorney with the Berkeley Center for Consumer Law and Economic Justice, said, and I quote, you can't just go to the court and say, I don't like this, or I think this might be a problem. In order to sue, you have to show that you are going to be threatened with a certain impending injury. Now, the states have alleged a future financial injury from lost revenue on student loan discharges. Fewer loans on the books, they say, would mean fewer taxes to collect. Now, the state of Missouri, they are arguing that it would be uniquely harmed by the impact of the large-scale debt cancellation on their Missouri's Higher Education Loan Authority, which is MOHELA. It's the nation's largest loan servicer, by the way. And the solicitor in Nebraska, James Campbell, argued on behalf of the states. He said the plan would cut into MOHELA's operating revenue significantly. Now, the Biden administration says the states' claims are highly speculative and indirect, undermining their legal standing to bring the case in the first place. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said, quote, MOHELA isn't here. It has the ability to sue and be sued. It has been set up as a separate entity. Usually we don't allow one person to step into another's shoes and say, I think this person suffered harm, even if that harm is great. In other words, Marky Mark can't argue on my behalf if I'm not bringing the suit against the said defendant, right? So Justice Amy Coney Barrett also pressed Campbell on MOHELA's absence, asking, do you want to address why MOHELA is not here? Campbell responded that MOHELA isn't here because the state is asserting its interest. MOHELA doesn't need to be here because the state has the authority to speak for them. Well, Barrett went on and said, if MOHELA really is an arm of the state, why didn't you just strong arm MOHELA and say you have to pursue the suit? In other words, MOHELA is not suing. So if it's really hurting MOHELA so much, where are they? Why aren't they in the court? Why aren't they suing? Why aren't they suing in conjunction with the state? The basic threshold is this. Is Missouri, is Nebraska, are these states injured today? Now, that's what South Texas College of Law professor Josh Blackman asked, and that's what's being asked, obviously, by the highest court, Supreme Court justices. Lower courts, legal scholars from across the ideological spectrum are divided on the question of injury, and that sets the stage for the justices to have the final say on whether the Biden debt relief plan inflicts clear harm on the state governments. Blackman said the answer is tricky because in recent years, the states have been given latitude, and this might be a case of the court scaling back on that broad authority, he said, although I'm not sure. Now, the U.S. Department of Education last year cited a need to protect borrowers from excessive economic hardship during the pandemic, invoked emergency powers to waive repayment programs and terms for some federal student loans. Now, the agency offered to absolve as much as $20,000 of federal debt for more than 40 million eligible borrowers, but this would go further, obviously. And that move drew an immediate legal challenge for Republican attorney generals in 6 states, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and South Carolina, who, by the way, if you just look at the money in those states, or if you look at the poverty level in those states, the high school dropout level, the lower college entrance level, they need it perhaps even more than states you're not seeing in the courtroom today, right? They see it as a costly bailout to college students at the expense of other American taxpayers. Quote, Joe Biden had no legal authority whatsoever. I think the larger issue is it's unfair to people who paid off their loans. It's unfair to people who didn't take out loans. That's Senator Eric Schmidt, Missouri's Republican former attorney general. He first brought the case. That's what he said to ABC News in an interview. And he added, it's adding to our debt. I think the reason why this case is before the Supreme Court and why Missouri and the other states are ultimately going to win is because Missouri has a loan servicing organization called MOHELA that derives revenue from interest. Let me give you an alternative. What if you made college more affordable in your state, like community college in your state, like we're doing here in California, free, so that people would be able to have education and get a better job and be off social programs, which are draining your state? Just an idea. Anyway, MOHELA, a state-created company which manages more than 5 million federal student loan accounts that total $148 billion. That's at the heart of the Missouri case, as I mentioned earlier, and what federal appeals court singled out as a linchpin in their decision. Now, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, that's based in St. Louis, they put the Biden debt relief plan on hold last year. They cited that it threatened financial harm to Missouri explicitly because of its ties to MOHELA. But then again, if one state out of 50 is affected, could the Supreme Court justices say that the Biden administration doesn't have the broad-reaching authority if one out of 50 states? Because MOHELA is in Missouri, and that seems to be the big issue here, right? MOHELA's contributed $6 million to state student aid programs in the current fiscal year, according to the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. And that law also requires MOHELA to pay $350 million to help improvements to state colleges and universities. Andrew Bailey, the new attorney general, said the court has identified it as a public entity that administers student loans. It provides college assistance programs for people across the state of Missouri, and so the state has an interest in it. So we're going to talk about this coming up in the second half of this hour. Let's rip another. Deanna Hardy of Marshfield, Wisconsin, is stocking up on pricier food items, those pricier items, meat, eggs, salmon, and that's before her family's monthly food stamp benefits are drastically reduced. Why? Well, who's in charge now in the House? Republicans. She said, we're really going to struggle. That's what the mom of two told ABC News. We're going to have to end up going back to cheaper items like noodles and processed stuff because the meat, the dairy, fruits, and veggies, well, it's expensive. She's nearly one of 30 million Americans who are bracing for a significant cut in their monthly food assistance. After nearly 3 years, the federal government is ending pandemic-era payments on March 1st for low-income families on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP. 18 states have already ended the extra SNAP benefits, impacting approximately 12 million Americans. The remaining 32 states and jurisdictions of Washington, D.C., Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands will follow suit on March 1st. An average household will lose $95 a month, almost $100 a month for groceries. That's according to the study from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And depending on other factors, including family size and income, some recipients will lose more than that. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's ripping the headlines, part one. We'll come back with part two and you right after this.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes? Their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family?
or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
Mama, what does the chicken say?
Chicken. Oh, okay.
When the wolf?
Oh, a wolf. Ooh!
What about the tiny dog? Cat? Owl? Dolphin? What does the turkey say? Whale?
Yeah, whale sound.
Do the giraffe.
Giraffe, really? Okay. Giraffe.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right.
Visit NHTSA.gov/the right seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that Sue Cowan Williams filed a lawsuit for equal pay for black teachers in Little Rock, Arkansas. 86 black teachers worked in the city's segregated school system. They were all members of the Little Rock Classroom Teachers Association. In 1941, the teachers formed a salary adjustment committee to look into pay discrimination. What they found there was a wide gap between black and white salaries. The average white elementary school teacher made $526 a year, while the black teacher earned only $321. White high school teachers brought home $856 a year, while black teachers only made $567. Backed with this research, the committee presented a petition to the school board demanding an end to pay discrimination. The board tabled the petition, and that summer passed another round of unequal pay raises. The teachers then approached the NAACP and asked them to handle their case. Thurgood Marshall agreed to take up the lawsuit. Marshall would go on to become the first black U.S. Supreme Court justice. Sue Cowan Williams, the head of the English department at Dunbar High School, was selected as the plaintiff for the case. The teachers lost their lawsuit and then won on appeal, but Williams paid a price for her involvement. The next school year, the school district did not renew her contract. She was finally rehired to teach at Dunbar a decade later. But first, the school superintendent called Williams to ask her if she had, quote, learned her lesson. It was a lesson that many workers have learned, that there is often a high personal cost for standing up for justice on the job. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
We are back on Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. Part dose of Ripped from the Headlines. Let's check it out. Checking out more what's ripped from the headlines. Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, who will hopefully be on the show soon about this and some other issues. Next Friday. Thank you, Marky Mark. And Chris DeLuzio, Democrat from Pennsylvania, introduced a bill this morning. It seeks to tighten safety measures for trains carrying hazardous materials and ensure that they're properly classified. By the way, if this sounds familiar, this is something Trump undid that was done already during the Obama administration. Now, this will be the first bill to be put forth by Congress after the derailment of a Norfolk Southern train carrying hazardous materials in East Palestine, Ohio this month. Now, the derailment forced Norfolk Southern to release and burn hazardous contents from some of the train cars, and that is prompting mounting concerns over health risks, toxic effects. You know, in World War II, when we dropped atomic bombs, there are arguments that cancer, birth defects, and other health issues are still happening to this day, decades later, generations later. We see that with Chernobyl, we've seen that with Fukushima, and now people fear we're going to see this in Ohio. Now, the train that derailed there included 11 tank cars carrying hazardous materials, but it wasn't classified as a high hazard flammable train and therefore wasn't subject to stricter regulations. The legislation seeks to broaden the definition of what constitutes a high hazard flammable train, lowering the threshold to meet the classification and ensuring that trains carrying hazardous materials are subject to stricter federal safety regulations. These high hazard flammable trains are not allowed to travel faster than 50 miles per hour, use special cars when transporting hazardous materials across country, and have newer braking equipment. That's according to the New York Times and their report there. Now, the Transportation Department currently applies these rules to trains with such materials in at least 20 consecutive cars, or 35 cars total. And that legislation is proposed by Congressman Khanna and DeLuzio, and that would lower the threshold to one rail car. The legislation would also expand the list of hazardous substances and require rail carriers to report to the National Response Center, state officials, and local officials within 24 hours of when a train carrying toxic chemicals derails. So what is the big picture here? Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio, Republican, called on Congress this month to review how high hazardous trains are classified. And this is what Congressman Khanna said, quote, "This is a moment where we need political leaders from all parties and from across the country to speak out loudly for better safety regulations and to acknowledge what so many Americans are going through." And then Congressman DeLuzio said, "For too long, railroads have prioritized profit ahead of public safety and their workers, and it's time to regulate the railroads. This legislation is an important step forward to finally strengthen our rail regulations and improve rail safety." Let's rip another. President Joe Biden is nominating Julie Su, the current deputy and former California official. Can I sidebar for a sec? I think it's just disgusting that a Republican member of Congress, and this is a different person, it's just, coming into my mind about Judy Wu, Congresswoman Judy Wu, who's the Congresswoman for really to the left of me, seriously. A very hardworking woman, has done so much for her constituents and especially the Asian American or the API community, not just here in California, but on a national level. And to have a Republican congressman, one of her own peers, question her loyalty to the United States of America because of her ancestry. Do you understand what this is akin to? I mean, not exactly akin, but, should we assume that all Germans are Nazis? And that all Germans' relatives killed my relatives and Jews and others in the Holocaust, the 11 million that were murdered? I mean, to even suggest, because of somebody's ethnicity and ancestry, because she is of Chinese descent, that she would be any more or less, but certainly any less loyal to her government as an elected congresswoman who has been in Congress and served her nation and her constituency and the AAPI community as an American for other Americans for years. It is just such blatant prejudice and discrimination, and he's doubling down on it. I'm not even going to say his name. I don't want him to get any press, okay, any more press. Just disgusting. And the fact there are people out there electing this man. You're all disgusting for electing him. He shouldn't be around next time. Anyway, I digress. President Biden is nominating Julie Su, the current deputy and former California official, as his next labor secretary, replacing the department incumbent from my home city, Boston, Mayor Marty Walsh. Anyway, she is a civil rights attorney. She's former head of California's Labor Department. She was central to negotiations between labor and freight rail companies late last year, working to avert an economically debilitating strike. She also has worked to broaden employee training programs and crack down on wage theft. If confirmed by the Senate, she would be the first Asian American in the Biden administration to serve in the cabinet at a secretary level. And the president said today that she is a champion for workers. He said, quote, Julie is a tested and experienced leader who will continue to build a stronger, more resilient, and more inclusive economy that provides Americans a fair return for their work and an equal chance to get ahead. He continued, she helped avert a national rail shutdown, improved access to good jobs free from discrimination through my Good Jobs initiative, and is ensuring that the jobs we create in critical sectors like semiconductor manufacturing, broadband, and healthcare are good paying, stable, and accessible jobs for all. She was considered to lead the department when the president won the White House, but instead became the department's deputy. Waltz announced his intention to leave the administration earlier this month. He's going to lead the National Hockey League Players Association, and she's going to serve as the acting secretary until the Senate acts on her nomination. The president had been under pressure from the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus and other Asian American and Pacific Islander advocates to select her to head the department. But I got to say, her ethnicity and her race aside, I think she's an incredible choice for this position. The administration was the first in more than 2 decades to not have a cabinet secretary of AAPI descent. Despite its regular declarations, it was the most diverse in history. Vice President Kamala Harris and a U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai are of AAPI descent, but they don't lead a cabinet department. So if she's confirmed, she would also expand the majority of women serving in the president's cabinet. She was confirmed by the Senate in her current role in 2021, 50-47. We'll see what happens this time around. Let's recommend it. 63% of countries around the world provide guaranteed paid parental leave for fathers. That's according to a new report that came out this morning from the World Policy Analysis Center. Why does this matter? Well, support is growing for paternity leave, but there's still a stigma attached to men who take time off to care for their children. Yet studies find numerous benefits for the economy, for fathers, for their partners, and of course, let's not forget, for the children. The UCLA distinguished professor Jody Heyman, founding director of the Policy Center there, said, there is widespread recognition that we don't solve gender equality without dads getting leave. The big picture, back in the 90s, only 46 countries had a paid leave policy for fathers, largely high-income nations, per the Policy Center's data. Now the number is nearly 3 times as high. And conspicuously absent from that list, we are the United States. Worth noting, the United States, are also one of just 7 countries in the world that do not have paid maternity leave, not just paternity leave. Other countries are Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Papua New Guinea, and Tonga. Yeah, those leading nations. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's written from the headlines. Coming up, our great guest, we're going to talk about student loan forgiveness and the arguments before the Supreme Court today in our nation's capital. Don't go away.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me. And my love
I think
for
I
him
told
was
you
just
Sebastian's going to be
immense.
starting on medication for
When something
ADHD, and they
feels
did his
different,
genetic
it could be
testing
Alzheimer's.
because we don't
Now
have
is the time to talk.
history.
Visit
The only thing
alz.org/our
on
stories
here,
to learn more. A message from the
genotype may
Alzheimer's
impact drug
Association
drug
and the Ad
mechanism of
Council.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
The Wreck of the Old 97 is a classic bluegrass song recounting a spectacular train crash in 1903, caused by the company's demand that the engineer speed down a dangerous track to deliver cargo on time. 120 years later, we have the wreck of the Norfolk Southern, a devastating crash caused by the corporate demand that it be allowed to run an ill-equipped, understaffed, largely unregulated,
Thank you for letting us take over
2-mile
once a month.
train
Really
carrying
appreciate that.
flammable, cancer-causing toxics through communities, putting profit over people and public safety. This rolling bomb of a train was hardly unique, for the handful
Not
of
much
multi-billion-dollar
younger, but yes.
railroad giants that
I doubt
control
it.
the
I doubt
industry
it.
also control lawmakers and regulators who are supposed to protect the public from public-be-damned profiteers. A measure of their arrogance came just 2 years ago when an Ohio legislative committee dared to consider a modest proposal for just a bit more rail safety. Norfolk Southern executives squawked like Chicken Little, asserting a plutocratic doctrine of corporate supremacy on such decisions. They even imperiously proclaimed that state lawmakers have no right to interfere in safety matters.
Yeah.
Ohio's Chamber of Commerce dutifully echoed Norfolk's concern for profit over people, testifying that, quote, Ohio's business climate would be negatively impacted by the bill. Never mind that Ohio's public safety climate can literally be negatively impacted by train wrecks. The Chamber postulated that a crew safety provision in the Ohio bill was illegal because, quote, it would interfere with the employment relationship between employers and their employees. Yes, that's a corporate claim that executives have an inalienable right to endanger workers. This is Jim Hightower saying, sure enough, bowing to the corporate powers, Ohio lawmakers rejected the safety bill. And that, boys and girls, is why train catastrophes keep happening.
Happy Tuesday. Welcome or welcome back. I'm Leslie Marshall here on the only true democracy in talk. Thank you for joining us and sticking around through it from the headlines for our great guest on this great topic that's extremely timely. I think a lot of you are paying attention, whether you're watching, you're reading, you're listening, or following somewhere, even in the corner of your screen at work. What is going on with the Supreme Court? Because this is going to affect millions of people, and you might be one of them. I'm really pleased to have with us today Natalia Abrams. Natalia is president and founder of the Student Debt Crisis Center, the SDCC. They guest host and do a takeover of the Leslie Marshall Show every month, and we're glad to have them do that. By the way, it is not a hostile takeover. We invited them to take over. The SDCC is a 501c3 nonprofit that centers the needs and voices of borrowers, partners with allies to impact public policy and end the student debt crisis. And student debt is a crisis. And certainly when we were in a pandemic, we're going to talk about that. Check out their website. You'll find out a lot of information. You can educate yourself if you don't get to hear everything today and you got to get back to work. Or if you miss them when they take over once a month, go to studentdebtcrisis.org. Their handle on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook is @debtcrisis.org. That's @debtcrisis.org. And Natalia, follow her. Her handle at Natalia Abrams. That's NATALIAABRAMS. Natalia, thank you for joining us. More than a pleasure to have you and I on at the same time together, or to have you on with me at the same time.
Thank you, Leslie. A pleasure to be here
today. And I know that you were at the Supreme Court today. I want to talk about this. I mean, there's so much, going on, with this, and I have so many questions. So I'm sorry if I'm all over the map with this. Okay. But first of all, we have people protesting on both sides. I'm certain that you saw that, as we see whenever people are protesting before the Supreme Court, they're carrying signs, they're protesting. Some are urging the justices to back the president's effort to cancel approximately $400 billion in student loan debt. And then there are others. For those that look at the lower court ruling from, predominantly Republican leaning or conservative leaning courts, is that a huge concern, the composite of this court, and even some of the questions that are being posed, because this is a very conservative, Republican, if you will, leaning Supreme Court?
So yes, I mean, with that question, yes, we are concerned about the makeup of the court and the partisan nature of the court. I would say we shouldn't be, because the law is completely on our side. The Republican side or the other side does not have standing in this case. We saw Trump-appointed justices on the appellate courts allow this to go through on appeal and on to the Supreme Court because of the legality of it. But yes, there is concern with the court, even though the law is on our side.
Now, I understand some big names on the Democratic side, Senator Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Robert Menendez, also Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Judy Chu, all addressed supporters of the plan from the steps of the Supreme Court today. Were you there for that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I was there bright and early at 6 a.m. for hours at the Supreme Court. And, you mentioned people against, I think I saw a few, but they were drowned out by the hundreds and hundreds of people there to support student debt cancellation. This was very much a rally for student loan borrowers, not anything against. And it was just amazing to see so many faces, hear so many stories, and especially hear from our lawmakers who have been on our side for many years, like Senator Warren and Senator Sanders.
During Rip from the Headlines, I kind of broke it down a little bit that, the argument is by the Biden administration that the president doesn't have to go through Congress to get this approved. He can do this like he did with an executive order because of the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act basically, not only gives him, but gives the Department of Education, the head of Department of Education, not broad authority, but authority within certain parameters. And one of the parameters is, during an emergency, during a crisis, during a pandemic, which was. And there are, millions of Americans who are, affected by that. And students could be argued are one of the segment of the population, women and minorities or others, that were disproportionately affected by this. And we certainly don't want people in this country going to hell in a handbag economically, because that drags the economic system down to hell with it. When I look at this and, what we talked about, Rip from the Headlines, if I put like my legal cap on for a second, it really seems to come down to Missouri. And to me, as an American, one state or 1/50th of our nation shouldn't dictate what happens to the rest of us, because Missouri is the only state that has that program, and that they're bringing up at the court. And I have to say, it's a cold day in hell when I agree with Amy Coney Barrett, but I do agree with her line of questioning when she said, well, where are they? Because that particular program is not suing the Biden administration and is not fighting this. Rather, the state of Missouri is on their behalf, which you really can't do. Like I explained, I can't go to court and say I'm fighting your battles. You have to be there.
Yeah, and we saw that Mohia, the loan company you're talking about, pulled out, wanted to make sure they were not associated with the case. And I want to ask these state attorneys general, why are you fighting against your own people, your own constituents? There are, 20 million people that could have total debt forgiveness or debt cancellation. As Ayanna Pressley says, it's not forgiving because you did nothing wrong, but debt cancellation, and 40 million people will benefit. And Missouri is one of those states. So if I was a Missouri resident, I would be very upset with my state for making it so everyone doesn't have debt cancellation. I don't know. I was taught when I was a little kid that life's not fair sometimes. It's not going to be fair for everyone. I don't understand how we can be seeing this from people that should be on the side of their own constituents.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we can laugh, we can say life certainly isn't fair because there's so many things. When you talk about fair, how about lack of fairness to the people? What is remarkable to me is the states that are fighting this and are suing have some of the lowest education rates, have some of the highest dropout rates, and have some of the highest poverty rates, which could help be not done away with, but corrected or reduced greatly by education. And there are so many people within their states that can't afford education. So they won't even get into the game. Never mind they got into the game and they can't pay it off. So this to me just screams that these states and behind this lawsuit are being purely political and not caring about the welfare of their state economically or their people educationally or economically.
Oh, absolutely. And, I've been doing this for well over a decade, and I still remember when Dr. Susan Rice spoke at a community college conference. Education is vital to our national security. For our country to get stronger and bright, we need to have a brighter, more educated society. That should be something that every lawmaker is fighting for, not fighting against. And I agree. We can barely even pass free community college in our country, let alone free college. But that is part of ending the whole student debt crisis. Canceling the debt is only one prong in this multi-pronged effort to actually have free and accessible and quality education in our country.
I know my best friend lives in London, and she was telling me, if her kids go to Oxford, it's $9,000 a year. I mean, it's still not cheap if you're poor, but that's much easier to borrow and pay back. It's absolutely insane. I live in California and people go, oh, well, if you're an in-state resident, you get a break. Well, tuition at UCLA, I mean, I think without housing is $19,000 a year. You got UCLA. Yeah, I thought
I paid it off. I'm one of the lucky ones, but this is what I
graduated.
Oh yeah,
you're right. See, that's with
UCLA.
Housing, right?
Yep.
It was $22,000, $19,000, and it was increased.
Without housing. No, it's expensive.
Yeah, well, at least I have two teenagers who are freshmen in high school right now, and right now I'm just hoping my son will graduate high school, never mind getting into college. My daughter, I think she'll get into a place like UCLA. That's another story. But let's talk about the People's Rally for Student Debt Cancellation. This was composed of over 20 different organizations that were in attendance at the rally, including your organization, the Student Debt Crisis Center, the SDCC, the NAACP, the American Federation of Teachers. Do you want to talk to us about some of these organizations? Because to your point, this isn't just about debt cancellation. This is part of a painting, and that's just one of the colors in this picture.
Absolutely. And I just want to give a shout out to those organizations, NAACP, Student Borrower Protection Center, Young Invincibles, all of the unions that came out. This was one of the best coalition efforts ever. And it was because of everyone coming together and doing their part that we were able to do this. And we are so dedicated to solving the whole puzzle, and we will not go away until we see that. And it's really amazing after so long to have so many partners, and COVID really did that. COVID exacerbated the student debt crisis for so many Americans, and that brought on a coalition of over 500 organizations that fought to cancel student debt.
I want to talk briefly about Shanna Hayes, 34. She attended the protest. She borrowed. Former math teacher, has a master's, over $150,000 in loans. She was a Pell Grant recipient for part of her education. She might qualify for $20,000 in federal student loan forgiveness. For some people, it's not wiping it away. It's taking a chunk of it away. I was a Pell Grant recipient, along with many other loans and grants. I know how hard, like you said, to pay it back. It really was. We're going to take a quick break. We will be back with our guest, and we'll be back with you. We are talking about the decision the Supreme Court is facing. We're talking about student debt cancellation. It's a student debt crisis, and it's an American crisis. Stick around.
There are a ton of social networking websites, but one stands apart for a very special reason. This one saves lives. It's matchingdonors.com.
Thank you.
Matchingdonors.com links organ donors with
My
people in
feed
need
is
of kidney
going
and other
in and
transplants.
out,
In the
Mark,
U.S.,
just to let
19
you know.
people die each
So
day
if I'm
waiting for
delayed,
an
that's
organ
why I'm not sure
transplant,
what it
most
is.
of them for kidneys. If you've
Okay.
ever considered becoming a living organ donor, or if you have someone in need of an organ transplant, visit matchingdonors.com. Home of the greatest gift of all, the gift of life. Matchingdonors.com.
Whoa, a new digital music player. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, because I can't wait to toss the big stereo. And now that we got your dad that big HD TV he wanted, we can throw out our old TV too.
Hold up. You can't just throw out electronics.
Really?
They need to be recycled or donated.
And how would we do that?
It's so easy, Mom. Today, recycling electronics is just as easy as buying them. Greenergadgets.org has all the info. We just enter our zip code to find a certified recycling center nearby. There are thousands of them, and new ones are being added all the time. Some of our local stores are even certified recycling locations.
I like that.
Did you know that some of the stuff in our old electronics could be used to make new products and conserve natural resources?
Well, okay then. Let's gather them up. What was that website again?
Greenergadgets.org. We just enter our zip code and go.
Most gasoline now contains 10% ethanol, and that's okay. Gas with higher than 10% ethanol is not okay. For your mower, chainsaw, or generator, I'm Chris Kaiser, president of the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute.
911, what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken, and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WAC, where we shine a light on America's callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. This time on Code WAC, what would you do if you found yourself unemployed, uninsured, and faced with more than $30,000 in debt from a medical emergency? How would you cope, and to whom would you turn? And how might single-payer Medicare for All help alleviate the stress patients face around medical debt in America? To find out, we spoke to Venus Lockett, a Georgia resident who owed tens of thousands of dollars after suffering a mini stroke that led to a short ambulance ride and one night of hospitalization in 2016. So do you have any thoughts on Medicare for All, which would provide health care to every American resident, regardless of their employment status? If you had something like that back when this mini stroke happened, do you know how that might have affected you and your life?
Yeah, being that I don't run back and forth to the hospital, having that in place would have alleviated my hesitancy, you know what I mean, to go for a life-threatening issue. Because I was thinking about bills over, my life. It'd have been a little bit more peace of mind. It's not like that I would have utilized it possibly on a regular basis because I don't run back and forth like that. But it definitely would have meant peace of mind in some kind of way.
Right. And peace of mind is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
The full Code WAC story on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcast. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
We are back on Leslie Marshall. Welcome back. Only True Democracy in Talk. Thank you for being with us. We also thank Natalia Abrams, our guest today, president and founder of the Student Debt Crisis Center, the SDCC. And they do a non-hostile, very friendly takeover of the show as guest hosts here at the Leslie Marshall Show every month. Check out their website, studentdebtcrisis.org. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, their handle at debtcrisis.org. And Natalia's Twitter handle is at Natalia Abrams, at NataliaAbrams. Natalia, thank you for holding. Welcome back. You were there today about what is happening, on the steps of the Supreme Court and what is happening inside the Supreme Court. There was a report released yesterday by Senator Elizabeth Warren from my home state of Massachusetts on the effects failing to uphold the president's relief measure and what that, what kind of an impact that would have on millions of people that have borrowed money. She's been a very a vocal lawmaker pushing for student loan forgiveness, and she's asked nearly 20 advocacy groups, including the NAACP and Debtors Union, the Debt Collective, to tell her how failure to deliver debt relief would impact their members. So for people that aren't as familiar, talk about how this would impact people if the Supreme Court does not rule in favor of the Biden administration and in favor of people who are students and who have so much of this debt and had so much of this debt during a pandemic, during a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were part of that report as well with Senator Warren, and we surveyed at Student Debt Crisis Center borrowers through the COVID pandemic over 6 times. And what we found was that the payment pause was by far the best, most impactful relief that Americans received. And that's that Biden wants to cancel student debt. They know that in the past, when the HERO's been used, so many borrowers, instead of returning to repayment, default. They're not able to make payments after a pause in their payments. Taking the debt away for most people or readjusting their loans to a smaller amount, the hope is that more people can actually actively pay back their debt. It can sound contradictory to think canceling debt means people paying their debt, but that's exactly why the Biden administration did it. We know that borrowers have used their pandemic savings, as I put in air quotes, for basic needs. We're talking about paying for their children's medication, buying groceries. It's not, no one that comes to us is traveling on lavish vacations or purchasing fancy purses. This is really to be able to just get by with the basic needs. And everyone in our country deserves to be able to afford their basic needs. So we're talking about a lifeline for 40 million Americans to be able to continue along with their life as we recover from this pandemic. And while we live the COVID pandemic, the economic impacts are going to last for years and decades beyond.
No, absolutely. And I know there are people out there that are misinformed when it comes to who would be benefiting from this mostly. And I want to share this data from the Education Department. They found that 81% of all applications, for debt relief before the online form closed back in November, came from the bottom 80% of congressional districts based on average income. So in other words, poorer people. And the bottom 80% of those districts have more borrowers eligible for relief than the top 20%. Because I think a lot of people think, what are you kidding me? They got a college degree, they got some high paying job, and and before they got that, they got this student debt and we're going to help them. Those aren't the people that can pay it aren't applying. It's the people that were and continue to struggle or to suffer, like you say, pulling from their savings just to pay for necessities.
Absolutely. And rich kids rarely, if ever, take out student loans, but some do. They pay it back in a fraction of the time of those who can't afford to do so. So they won't take that full 10 years or 20 years to pay back. They'll pay it back in 2 or 3 and not accrue the same type of interest. I mean, that's the biggest problem that borrowers talk to us about is interest. It's the compound capitalized interest. And to address another claim we hear from the other side is, you took out the loan, why can't you pay it back? So many borrowers have paid back their initial balance and then some. And because of that compounding capitalized interest, they owe, double from what they initially borrowed and more even after 10 years of paying it back.
Last time I checked, I'm old enough to remember when the United States government bailed out an entire industry called the automobile industry. So, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. And this isn't just, this isn't one segment of the population. This goes across various segments of the population throughout different states. It blows my mind. I mean, it's not people out there that are doctors that are applying, for this forgiveness because they have a job, that pays them enough that they can pay it back. That's a very different situation. So folks know here very quickly, how did this issue wind up at the Supreme Court? Because some people, wonder how it even got this far. And you had touched upon it briefly at the beginning of our interview today.
So, yeah, I mean, first off, it's from so many student loan borrowers speaking up and sharing their story. That's what got me into this, what got so many organizations into it. But then we did see the pandemic just absolutely the need for student debt cancellation, and saw so many lawmakers that hadn't before come on board to this issue, and most importantly, the President of the United States. That was a wonderful thing to say today. I had the opportunity to speak at the rally that we finally have the President of the Department of Justice fighting for student loan borrowers. And that's huge. So even if we don't get the desired outcome at the court, we are only at the beginning of the end to see full relief for all student loan borrowers.
And for people that don't know how the Supreme Court works, there's not going to be a decision in the next couple of days. They make all the decisions by June, before the summer and their little recess there, their vacations. So even though there's, a lot of breath being held and fingers being crossed, it's going to be months before we actually learn the outcome of this case. Have there been any indicators that make you feel more positive or less positive based on questions that you've heard that are being, leaked out from reporters and shared, with reports that are being asked by the Supreme Court?
I think I'm just still really focused on the fact that it's legal. I joke that my crystal ball is broken, and so I don't know what the justices will say, but I do have a lot of faith in our president, and I think he's heard voices of borrowers loud and clear that he's not going to go away on this issue. We need to stay clear and focused right now on Plan A, which is passing this through the Supreme Court. And to all the student loan borrowers out there listening, we got to stay loud. It's, again, because of you that we are here and can get. The more that will show that we have public opinion on our side, the more relief we'll see in the future.
You talked about people pulling from their savings to pay for things. One of the things I also am old enough to remember is when there were so many mortgages foreclosed and what that did not only to people, what that did to our economy. And if people can't pay for their homes, because they've run out of savings to borrow from to just pay for those kinds of necessities. Because I think for most of us, our rent or our mortgage are usually, I know for me, it's my biggest bill, right? My mortgage is my biggest bill. And that's probably the first one most people pay because it's like, okay, paid the mortgage, I can stay in my house. Now people go into, utilities and food. And but if you can't keep that roof over your head, that hurts an economy. That hurts an economy, and certainly it hurts.
Absolutely. You should join our organization. You're taking my talking points right out of my mouth. This impacts all Americans in the sense that if you have a home you want to sell, you're not going to have a buyer to buy that home.
Absolutely.
And if this will impact the entire economy, and it already has been, and we've seen an increase in the economy by borrowers having payments on hold. We need to continue that. We need to stop this crisis once and for all, and then the borrower side of the crisis, then we're going to move to making college free for all Americans.
Remember, if banks take back your house, they sell it for a lot less, and all the people living in that neighborhood happened to me. My house value went down the tube, and that not to the pit of hell, but definitely dropped greatly. We have less than 60 seconds left, and I want to give you that. What is the message that you want people to come away with today? Take the floor.
I have so much hope. Again, from doing this for so long, it's given me a lot of perspective that to have Senator Warren fighting for us 10 years ago, and she was frankly the only one. And now we have just, over 100 lawmakers that have signed on to the resolution, the President of the United States, the Department of Justice. What more could a girl ask for? So very, thrilled to see the amount of support that we have. And then especially to the main VIPs, the student loan borrowers. This is because of you, and all of us, those 20 plus orgs that were at the People's Rally today, will not stop fighting for you.
And, it's a testament to you, Natalia, as president and founder of the Student Debt Crisis Center, because when you founded the SDCC, you didn't know this would be the future either. So hats off to you, girl. I love a strong woman who says, I'm not going to stop till I get what I want. And hopefully before June, we will. Not you just get what you want, but the American people get what they want. because the majority of American people support this, and certainly so many millions of people need it in our nation. Website again for the SDCC is studentdebtcrisis.org. Their handle on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter is @debtcrisis.org, @debtcrisis.org, and Natalia's Twitter handle is @Natalia Abrams, NATALIAABRAMS. Check it out. You want to know more? Some of you out there would benefit from this. Check it out. Natalia, thank you for being with us. I know how exhausted you must be. I know you got kids and you were, at the rally. So much going on. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Happy to be here.